This is a production of SDPB.
Coming up on Game Time, it's football season. We have the top players and teams to talk about. Plus, we'll walk you through each class to discuss the top contenders. Then we'll get you ready for week one with a deep dive into all of the top games coming up this week. All next on Game Time.
Game Time is supported by the South Dakota Career and Technical Student Organization Center. Through CTSOs, students learn professional development, leadership, and industry-specific skills, helping students learn, lead, and succeed. And by South Dakota State University grows talent, strengthens industries, and supports communities across our state, building opportunity in a greater South Dakota. More at sdstate.edu.
Game Time is back, Jandy. We've done it. We're here for season number 2, and we're super stoked, I think both of us, I can speak for you, to be covering Game Time throughout the 26-27 school year.
Yeah, such a great experience last year and getting the interaction from fans out there. And the numbers were good, and guess what? They had us back.
Right.
Nate,
How about
this is great.
that?
It's a miracle. But nothing better than talking high school football, especially at the beginning of the year. Hopes are high across the entire state. Today's episode, we're going to focus on 11B, 9A, 9AA, and 9B. So the 9-man schools, 11B, start a week earlier than the big schools.
Yep.
But stay with us. Next week, we'll have a complete preview of all the big schools and the All-Nations Conference, which gets going a week after.
All right. And as you can see, the set looks a little bit different this year, too, which is fantastic.
Downtown Sioux Falls Studio, it's great to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun. So let's just get into it. There's no better way to get started than just jumping right in. Class 11B. St. Thomas More a year ago was no longer the bridesmaid. They finally won that state championship. What do we think about the defending champs in 11B coming into the 26 season?
First of all, what a great season it was for them last year, and they did it with a lot of really key seniors. So they do lose some big-time players, but they have new head coach Nick Wald taking over. His son Noah Wald has been one of the most prolific quarterbacks in 11B that we've seen in a long time. So he's back to really get this team going. And the transition of coaches, some years it's a big deal when you change coaches, but Nick has been on this staff, so I think the transition will be little things here and there that they'll have to tweak, but they will have to introduce a lot of new starters on this team, and 11B is really packed, so it's going to be tough for them to repeat, but they come back in with a lot of confidence.
When I think of 11B, I think of big, strong offensive lines. How does that offensive line look for St. Thomas More?
I think they've got a lot of good pieces there. The size they had last year will not be matched this year. But guys like Rush Turner, who are going to play college football next year, and maybe even at the D1 level, he's going to go D2 for sure. I think he's one of those guys that really anchor a really good line up front. And with Noah Wald throwing the ball, sometimes they only need a couple seconds before they get rid of it. So I really like what St. Thomas More brings up front.
All right, and then you got Elk Point Jefferson. Okay, Elk Point Jefferson, speaking of big offensive lines, I mean, this is one that you think of too. They seem to have been, we've seen them, that line just get to the point that it needs to be to win championships over the last 5 years, and I think they've got another really good offensive line this season.
It's really amazing what they've done since Jake Terry has taken over. They have become a consistent power in 11B. Even last year when I don't think they had one of their best athletic teams that they've had, they still made it to the Dome and challenged St. Thomas More. This year, they bring back one of the most dominant offensive lines, and they will be able to run the football. They've got a couple of different backs that they'll rotate, just like they have in past years. But the junior class, coming from sophomore to junior, have really started to mature. I think Elk Point Jefferson is ready for maybe a 1 to 2 year run here in this class.
All right, and then you got the Winter Warriors, a 6-5 season a year ago. They got a new head coach this year. I know that some of the things fell maybe short of expectations a year ago for Winter, but we know what Winter is. We know how quickly they can reload. What do you like about, I guess, the new commander-in-chief for the Winter Warriors team and what the potential could be this year for the Warriors?
Yeah, so last year, I mean, the numbers weren't as high. The senior class wasn't as big as it usually is, and they still did still did pretty well. They still won 6 games and caught fire toward the end of the year. So new head coach Kevin Keyser comes in. I don't think he's going to mess with very much of the style that Winter Warriors play, but I think they'll come in and they'll add a few more players and they'll be more of a contender this year. At least that's what other coaches in 11B tell me, that this team is back on their way up.
All right, and it wouldn't be 11B football without seeing Winter Warriors like in that conversation, kind of in that upper echelon of the class.
Yeah, they're definitely one of those teams that you just wonder how can they sustain that type of success. Well, last year we found out you can't do it every year, but they still had a winning season and a good end. So yeah, Winter kind of just belongs in that conversation. I think another team that's starting to push their way into that conversation, Sioux Valley has been a model of consistency over the last several years. They've got an experienced backfield with a really good number of players out for football again this year. I think they're going to be one of those teams to watch out for as well.
And there's quite a few underclassmen with Sioux Valley as well, right?
Yeah, and I think that's always an interesting to try to predict where these teams are going to be when they have big, good underclassmen. Sometimes they really start playing well a year ahead when you think they will, and sometimes they take that year to get better before we see them really start to dominate in the next couple of years.
All right, any other teams that we need to have our eye on in a very early slate with 11B?
Yes. I think 11B is wide open this year. We got some of those top tier teams that we're looking at, but I think Dual is a team that a lot of coaches are talking about, with a couple of all-state players back that could be really good. Mobridge Pollock made some noise, especially early in the season last year. They're a team with their quarterback back, with Max Saxon back. Maybe have to find some new guys up front, but they'll be in the conversation. Clark Willow Lake showed what they could do last year. And I think McCook Central is the one team that may see the biggest improvement over last year and may become contenders this year.
All right, so obviously a lot to talk about there with the teams for 11B. And we're going to do it again this year. We'll do game changers and highlight some of the top performers week to week. But let's just look at the preseason look, I guess, at some of these game changers. First with 11B. I know we talked about some of these kids, but who are we missing?
Well, let's start with Max Saxon, just because this is a guy setting school records left and right. When he is healthy, he is really tough to defend. Decided to go to Northern State to play his college football next year. I think that's a great fit for him. He could really excel at that level. But what I'm impressed at is every year he continues to improve part of his game. You know, he's strong. We know he's a bull, but he's gotten faster each and every year over the last couple of years. I think he's a guy to watch. We talked about Noah Wald from St. Thomas More. Has put up huge numbers at quarterback for St. Thomas More. He'll have a different crew around him, but he can really make things go. And everybody else on this list, I mean, almost anybody on Elk Point Jefferson. We asked all the coaches, like, who should be considered as top players in this class? There were 6 or 7 Elk Point Jefferson players named on this list. But Aiden Hammett came on really strong last year and did a great job. Brody Van Rokel is definitely one of their key guys on their team. And Addison Peterson, this guy's going to become one of the best linemen in the state, regardless of class. So those are just a few guys. But yeah, we want to mention all these guys on that list.
All right, and then, you know, moving over to 9AA. So once we start going through some of these 9-man classes, you're gonna see pretty early on some shuffling and some teams, you know, moving around here a little bit. You know, it kind of starts with the defending champions. Freeman Marion, Freeman Academy won the state championship a year ago. One of the most dominating 9-man teams in the state. Well, Freeman Academy is no longer. Marion moved over to co-op with Parker for football. So Freeman is now by themselves and they're moving down to Class 9A. So does that open the door in Class 9AA this year?
I think it does, just because we'll talk about Freeman more when we get to 9A, but they got a lot back. Even though they lost some, they got a lot back. They're going to be a powerful team to contend with. But in 9AA, we saw Parkston start the year out last year with the loss. They ended the year with a loss, but in between, they won every single game, and they did it again with a, you know, not their best set of athletes, but those guys are grown up now, and they've got 2 all-state players back engaged, Jadozi and Mason Jervik. So I think most coaches believe that Parkson could be that one team that people are looking at, but they're not the only ones. There's a lot of teams in this class, I think, that are going to cause some havoc. Hamlin being one of them, won it all back in 24, came up just shy last year in the semifinals. Bowden Stevenson moves to quarterback this year. I think he's one of the top players in the class. How about Bonhomme, though? That's another team that they feel like when they have a good class come up all together, they're really dangerous. And they haven't been in that top 5 talk the last couple of years, but a lot of coaches think that they're one of those teams that are going to be a top 5, if not title contender.
Yeah, and there's another Crownover that we got to watch,
Yes,
right?
always a couple good running backs there. Isaiah Crownover this time, beast on defense. He can pound it as far as a fullback on offense, but Major Arstad is the guy who's been running the ball for them the last couple of years, and now as a senior, he could be really dangerous this year.
All right. Plus, you got Platte Geddes, a really good junior class. That's another team I think that, we talked about them a year ago.
Yep.
They were, we talked about them a few times a year ago.
Yeah.
But that's another team I think that we're going to be spending some time on this season.
Yeah, Bruce Hansen does a great job coaching those guys down there, and he's a pretty straight shooter with me. And this year he's got a smile on his face. He thinks this team could be waiting in the weeds, being able to knock off some of those teams. He won't say that, but he is getting close. And he's one of those. He's got one of those teams that has a lot of talent. They've got a new quarterback coming in too that could really revolutionize their offense and be able to really keep them balanced.
All right, a couple other teams. Britton Heckler first here. We talked about the good offensive lines with Class 11B. But what can you tell us about the good line that they have up in Britton Heckler?
Yeah, in 9-man football, sometimes you don't see quite as much of dominant offensive lines, but these guys have the athleticism and size to really push people around. They're going to be able to do a lot offensively because they are so good on the offensive line. They'll be able to pass and run really effectively this year.
And then Hansen, Jet Jagger, he's their quarterback. There's a lot to unpack here with Hansen too.
I like this team. So, Jacob Giles took over a couple years ago. We all kind of know his background as a prolific passer, likes to spread out the field. He came in and tried to run the Hansen offense and did a good job the last couple of years. But this year, I think with Jet Jagger throwing the ball, they're going to be able to spread it out a little bit more and get things done. I think Jason Porth is one of the guys we're not talking about at the beginning of the year, that he could emerge as one of the top receivers in all of 9AA.
Yeah, just so much to unpack with 9AA. It's such a wide open type of year. It's going to be really interesting, especially the first few weeks, just to kind of see who jumps ahead right away, see if there's any surprises and things like that. Speaking of surprises, we saw a little bit of the emergence a year ago with Sioux Falls Lutheran. All right, they're in 9AA. So that's another team that I guess you could say is intriguing, correct?
Very intriguing. The 9B team that make the playoffs in their first time in school history. They're a young school, but they're moving up, and now they're moving up classes to 9AA, and they've got some pieces back to really do some damage. Another interesting thing to look at is there's some 11-man teams that moved down to 9AA this year. Bridgewater Emory Ethan, Baltic, both played 11-man. Baltic, by the way, hasn't won a game in 5 years. They got a new coach this year. He told me too, we're going to win a game this year. Multiple games is the target, and I think they could in 9AA. They've got some really good players in Gavin Scovold and players like that back that really could make some noise. So a lot of contenders: Viborg, Hurley, Hill City, Sioux Falls Lutheran, like you mentioned, all really intriguing teams.
All right, and then who are some of the players that maybe we haven't mentioned yet that, or people you want to reiterate and refamiliarize with the audience when you think of 9AA?
Well, some of the top players in this class I think we're going to see is Gage Jadozian. He does such a great job on defense, just leading the way Parkston attacks on defense. He'll get some offensive stats this year too, but defensively one of the top players. Bowden Stevenson of Hamlin, they've had really prolific quarterbacks in the last several years. He's going to be that guy for them this year. But let's also mention Logan Street. He hit a 50-yard field goal last year for Hill City and is back. So he's just one of these really good players on this list. Jonathan Lenardi, another guy from Hamlin, who I think is going to put up some monster numbers this year.
Maybe we should have Logan Street teach us how to kick field goals. What do you think the longest we could kick?
What do you think the longest you could kick first?
I bet it would be somewhere maybe in the 27 to 30 yard range. Maybe.
I think Nate would beat me, but this smells like a feature on SDPB coming up. We'll see.
All right, and again, we do want to thank everybody for tuning in a year ago. It really helped pave the way for this second season of Game Time. To revamp a little bit, we will introduce some new things throughout the year. We'll highlight a little bit more with some of the other sports and activities, from time to time as well that are taking place throughout the state. There's some ideas and stuff that we've been talking about moving forward. And again, we're at a new location. We're downtown Sioux Falls this year at the Sioux Falls SDPB Sioux Falls studio, which is going to be fantastic as well, because it's a great setup here.
It's a great setup. I love it, and working with you is great as always, Nate. Great to have you back alongside. But the other thing is we're going to incorporate a few other sports too and a few other stories. It'll still be predominantly football for you football fans out there, but there's so much going on. We want to make sure we include a few more sports throughout the season, so be watching for that.
And it's great to work with you again too, JD.
Thanks. That was in my contract.
Yeah, I bet.
I love it.
All right, moving on from that, Class 9A. All right, so Wall, the defending champions, one of the most impressive overall teams that I can remember in recent history a year ago, the Wall Eagles. But they're moving to a different class as well. We mentioned Marion Freeman Academy, up in 9AA. Well, now they're in this class in 9A. You got Howard, who's here. I mean, there's going to be some fun, I think, here as well when we're talking about 9A. Where do we start?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of feels like Freeman is the one with the target on their backs, and they have changed so much. A lot of almost every coach I talked to in nine-man football said they are the team to beat. But let's look at what happened. They lost over double-digit players to Marion. They lost some key seniors from last year, but they have such good players coming up that were sophomores and juniors last year that even with those changes on the team, they still are the favorites in 9A. But it's not going to be like an open shut case this year where they're just going to be able to waltz in and clean up on the schedule. There's a lot of good teams in this class.
I think of Howard, right? A year ago, Howard had a very early season loss to Alcester Hudson, and we sort of just started, I don't want to say we dismissed Howard, but we just kind of said, well, maybe they're not going to be quite what Howard.
They were.
Right. And it took
they were
some
adjusting.
It took some growing up, and they still found themselves, playing at the Dome
All
come
the way to the
November,
Dome.
because that's just, how Pat Rummel sometimes rolls. But Howard, now that team that needed to find their identity a little bit a year ago, do you think they have a much quicker start in 2026?
Yeah, in high school football, some years you can pick up at the 300 level classes, and sometimes you got to start at the 100 level classes. This is one of those years they can start at the 300, 400 level classes because these guys are back and ready to go, and they've got Colt Becker, maybe one of the best running backs that Howard has had since the Loudenberg era. I mean, that's big talk, but he is that good. He's going to put up, and they rotate running backs. They'll have a lot of guys, but this is the guy that can really carry a team, and Colt Becker is ready to do that this year for Howard. So they're locked and loaded, ready to start out in a little higher gear than they started last season.
And I know it ended disappointingly for Howard a year ago, but I think one thing that really helped them as far as the confidence is they had to go on the road a lot throughout the playoffs. They kind of became that road warrior team, and they were that right there, that stretch that they had to get to the Dome. I think that stretch is what you're going to see carry over to this year.
I think so too, and right after the game last year, well, not right after the game, but an hour or so after the game, Pat Rummel came up and talked to me, and he said, we played really well to get here last year, but next year these kids are already focused. That was last November. They were already focused on making a run this year because they saw what they could do with last year's team. They feel like this year's team has much more of a head start. So even though Freeman is the team that people are definitely eyeing, I think Howard is right there with them.
All right. And then Elkton Lake Benton. Okay, so they've maybe lost some players, but you like their culture. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. I think this culture started a couple of years ago when they started making the playoffs more consistently again. And then last year with the coaching change, they took it up even another notch. So whenever I talk with that team or at a game of Elkton Lake Benton, you can see like the professional way that they go about their business. And despite the loss of Colt Beck and some of these all-state linemen that they had last year, I feel like they are able to really find a way where they can be one of those consistent teams like we talked about Elk Point Jefferson doing a couple of years ago. We talked about some of these other teams that have moved into just consistently being good every year. I think Elkton Lake Benton has a chance to do that this year.
Who else do we need to be looking at when we think of Class 9A?
Yeah, a lot of teams in 9A that could contend. We saw Alcester Hudson win a couple of key games last year. They're back with an all-state tight end in Brian Hoxson who could really make things go. I think Bennett County is a team too.
It's athletes, right?
Just athletes, up and down, and it's going to be tough for them to be deep in the playoffs, but I think they could be an improved team over last year. Canastota, another team that just got used to 9B last year, moves back up to 9A. So they've been around a lot of different classes, but Peyton Asherson and Carter Becker among some of the stars on this team that could make them good. Castlewood, another really interesting team. You got to love Camden Kessler. We'll talk about him in the Game Changers a little bit more, but with his leadership, they get a tough schedule coming in right out of the gate, but they're a team that could be there. Centerville made some noise last year. I think Faulkton moving up from 9B to 9A, they're an interesting team because I think they're better than they were last year, but a tougher class might keep them from being a Final Four type team, but I think they're there in the mix. And Kimball White Lake, I think is going to really help them being a 9A team this year. 9AA, they would always be right outside those top contenders and couldn't quite knock the door down. But I think this year is a year that they could really take that next step.
All right, so you briefly mentioned it, some of the game changers, some of the kids to watch with Class 9A. Who else do we need to talk about?
Well, for sure, Colt Becker. I think he's going to be the player to watch in this entire class. But Freeman has so many athletes. Easton Cheddar, Alaric Knittel up front, Hunter Nonkevo, another guy up front that's going to make some noise. And, of course, David Walter. He did so much last year for them on the outside, and he's just gotten stronger and bigger and taller. Like, he's going to be a tough guy to shut down.
Heck of a basketball player, too.
Oh, heck of a
very
basketball
key
player.
Component to Freeman's Spring of 26 state basketball title.
Very key, and that's another team that should be ready to roll for next year. Another guy I got to mention out from Timberlake, Brock Bauer, had a phenomenal year last year. Being up there isolated in the northwest part of the state, you don't get quite as much recognition, but he deserves some recognition, and will, I'm sure, make some game changer lists this year.
All right. So then we got Class 9B. This is where it gets a little fun here too, because you got St. Mary's, that another one of those teams that just had a phenomenal run a year ago. So they're coming in as the defending champs, but all of a sudden here comes Wall. Now they're sliding into the class. We know what Wall could be about. I mean, this is going to be a fun one.
And Warner, another 9A team that moved down to 9B. So, they're a team that's familiar with making it to the Dome and semifinals and runs like that. So 9B got a lot tougher this year. And we have the defending champ back in St. Mary's, who ran the table, only lost 3 seniors from last year's team. They look really tough, but the competition got a lot tougher. Plus, they got a transfer quarterback in from Tri-Valley, Brady Jewett. So you add that to what they already had, and Alex Lindman, the big guy up front going to USD, 2 all-state linemen back. Like, there's not many weaknesses on this team. And for St. Mary's, this is a team that some years would barely have enough players to field a team. They'd still be good, but they barely have enough players. They have the most players out for football that they've had ever. So I think St. Mary's, the football fever is really caught on, and they feel like a daunting defending champ. But you throw in Wall, and they've got Tanner Vollmer back, the quarterback who's been there for the last 2 seasons. You got some really talented receivers that he can throw to. I think they're a team that can really throw the ball. We'll see if they can rebuild those lines the way they were last year. Lost such good senior class last year. But again, that's another team with culture. Like, I love what they do. Yeah,
I was going to ask you, just speaking of Wall, just to kind of give them some props, since they too are a defending champ from a year ago. Talk about what Lex Heathershaw has done to that program and how much I think he means to the program and how much the community of Wall means to him.
He played there, and that he is so invested in making Wall a powerhouse every year, and he does all of the I dotting and T crossing to make sure that this team can be as good as possible. And I've had a chance to hang out with their team last year. We did a story on them, and in the offseason I've had a chance to talk to Lex, and I've had a chance to talk to Tanner Vollmer as well. And there's just so much complimentary talk about what Lex and his coaching staff does. The momentum is definitely there in Wall. This is a team we cannot forget about this year in 9B. I think they're right there with St. Mary's. And then Warner maybe a half step back. They've got a couple all-state players back as well. So this, to me, makes it a really fun 3-team, especially 3-team race. But there's more teams than that.
It's just crazy. Like, we go through this, we talk about the culture that some of these programs have, and it's just like that's the consistent thing. Like, even Warner, like, they have a great culture there when it comes to football. The community backs them so well I mean, we're very blessed to see so many great programs, so many great coaches that are a part of all of these programs that are molding our kids in the state and molding them not just to be great football players, but to be great young men.
Exactly, and Warner's a great example of that. They've had, the coaching tradition, passed on from father to son, and all the other coaches in the state know that when they prepare against a Warner team, like, they're going to have everything buttoned up because they always get things ready. And with Alec Mickelson back this year, I think this is a team that could have a very successful, especially regular season, if they put themselves position-wise in the late, in the rankings the way they need to be at the end of the season to get some home games, because these three teams don't play each other during the regular season. We could have 3 undefeated teams when we get to the playoffs. So if they put themselves seed-wise where they get some home games, that's going to mean a lot this year.
Absolutely. And then, Avon, okay, they were at the Dome a year ago. They're obviously in 9B. You got Coleman, Egan, Harriet Selby area, Woolsey, Wessington, Kadoka area. We talked about Kadoka area quite a bit a year ago too. We talked about some of these top teams that we like in 9B, but there's some pretty quality programs that are sitting right below that.
Exactly. Avon maybe not as big up front, but Easton Seas is back at quarterback. They've got, Birama at running back. They've got the talent to be able to do something special this year. Wolsey Wessington is the team that's super young, but their young classes are really good. So they could be one of those surprise teams that come out of it. Harriet Selby area, another team I think that you can't count out. They've got an all-state player back as well. But Kadoka, you mentioned it, Carson Eisenbraun back at quarterback. He's one of the top talents in this class.
All right, so some of the game changers for Class 9B. Again, some of these names we've already talked about, but let's kind of go through some of those again. If you want to expand on any, feel free, Jandy. And then what else do we need to have our eye on as far as individuals in Class 9B?
Exactly. So St. Mary's, Wall, Warner, well represented on this list. Personally, I think Logan Bauer is going to have an explosive year at running back for St. Mary's, so watch out for him. He's going to be big. But some of those outside of those top teams we talked about, how about Lucas Pesky? He made our game changers list several times last year out of Iroquois Lake Preston. He could individually take that team on his shoulders. So we'll see if he can do that. But Jared Weisbach, one of those all-state players returning for Harriet Selby area. Yeah, all these guys deserve a shout out. They've had a great off-season, getting ready for a big year this year.
All right, so Class 11B and all 3 9-man classes, they start this week with their regular season. First segment of Top Tilts for the year, Jandy. What are some of the key matchups right out of the gate that you're looking for?
I can't wait to see a few of these, starting with Mobridge Pollock at St. Thomas More. And this is one, I think Mobridge Pollock could make a statement, but St. Thomas More, they're a much different team than last year. So this is a much more even game that I'm looking at. And Mobridge Pollock hasn't had a real signature win. This would be a huge win on the road coming right out of the gate. Parker Marion, I can't wait to see what this team can do. I have had some coaches tell me that their 7-on-7s and things that they played in the offseason that said, watch out, Parker Marion's a really good team. And they play Dual, another team that all coaches are buzzing about. So they're right there. The rest of these games, Castlewood Hamlin, another one in the 9-man ranks. I think that will be a phenomenal first-round game. But any one of these games, find your way to see one of these games. I can't wait to get this season started.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. And again, next week we will preview 11 AAA, AA, and A for that, as they'll be getting their seasons started here a week from now. So we're going to have a lot of fun this year. We're going to, again, try some new things. We'll incorporate some different things that highlight some different kids from kind of across the state and some different sports and activities. But it's going to be a lot of fun, and we're excited to just be able to bring this right to you guys. It's because of you guys that watch every week that make this show possible, and I can't say enough. We greatly appreciate it.
We love talking to you. Make sure you send us your feedback. You've got our handles that you can reach us anytime, and let us know if you have any ideas too to improve the show.
All right. Well, he's Jason Andera. I'm Nate Weck. We'll see you next week here on Game Time.